We asked couples to have sex in a box.
Welcome to WatchMojoUK, and today we'll be counting down our picks for the top 20 wildest British TV scandals. For this list, we're looking at the most contentious and ridiculous controversies to be born from British television.
Please know that we would never jump a queue.
Let us know in the comments which one you think is the most absurd. Number 20. Ghost Watch.
The programme you're about to watch is a unique live investigation of the supernatural. It contains material which some viewers may find to be disturbing.
The BBC once aired something so terrifying, so spine-chilling, so horrific and traumatic that it's never been shown on television since. And no, it wasn't an episode of Doctor Who. This was Ghost Watch, the fake ghost hunting special that appeared on BBC One on Halloween in 1992.
No! Go away! Mum, help me! Don't leave me, Mum!
Have we lost the link completely?
Starring credible broadcasters like Michael Parkinson, Ghost Watch had an air of legitimacy, despite the fact it was totally fictional and didn't set out to trick anybody. When a poltergeist appeared to take over the studio and possess Parky, the public was scared senseless, with tens of thousands of concerned viewers calling into the BBC because it was so upsetting.
Can you see them?
Yeah.
What's this?
Number 19. Angus Deaton. Plenty of celebs have weathered bigger storms than this in recent years, and it hasn't tanked their careers. Not so for Angus Deaton, who was dropped from Have I Got News For You after this scandal broke in 2002. The tabloids reported that Deaton had been taking illegal substances and had a dalliance with a sex worker, and then a few months later that he'd been cheating on his wife for a long time. In the wake of all this, the BBC asked him to leave the show, and Deaton acquiesced. Many thought the Beeb was being absurd to get rid of him over something like this, since so many others had done far worse things and not had to leave the BBC. Number 18. Fridgegate. Ahead of the December 2019 general election, everybody wanted to interview Boris Johnson, who had been PM since winning a Tory leadership election against Jeremy Hunt earlier that year.
The Prime Minister just arrived in the last few seconds. You can see he's just got inside.
But Johnson appeared to be camera shy. So camera shy that he refused time and time again to appear on Good Morning Britain to talk to Piers Morgan and Susanna Reid.
Prime Minister, will you deliver on your promise to come on Good Morning Britain?
Of course I will.
One morning, while Johnson was helping out with a milk round to talk to viewers that way, he decided that rather than talk to a GMB reporter, he'd run off and go hide in a giant fridge full of milk.
Right, he's been taken inside, into the freezer.
You've gone into the fridge.
There's a bunker.
It's
very frosty
heroic
reception we've
work,
had
mate.
so far, isn't it?
That was heroic work.
The whole thing was a farce. Number 17. Minipops. Music videos can be provocative and suggestive, which is why so many people took issue with this particular show all the way back in the 1980s. On the face of it, it was conceived to be harmless, much like Kids Bop over in the US. But while Kids Bop often changed the more risque lyrics and dances in modern pop, Minipops didn't, leading to complaints that children were being sexualized by performing songs with provocative lyrics in provocative costumes.
A little sunshine, a sea of gladness to wash away all the tears of sadness.
Kids were wearing makeup and singing about sex right there on TV, and the show was cancelled after one series because of public outrage. Number 16. Piers Morgan quits. Piers talks a good game, but back in 2021, he proved that he couldn't take it as well as he can give it.
And I understand that you don't like Meghan Markle. You've made it so clear a number of times on this programme.
He derailed Good Morning Britain one fateful day in March to talk, yet again, about Meghan Markle, the Duchess of Sussex, because he was still upset that she ghosted him years before. But this time, weatherman Alex Beresford didn't let it stand, and pointed out to Piers that he was being a ridiculous obsessive over a woman who just didn't want to talk to him.
Yet you continue to trash her.
OK, I'm done with this.
No.
Sorry, no.
Sorry.
Sorry.
Do you know what? That's pathetic.
You can trash me, mate, but not my
No.
See you later.
I'm being...
Sorry, can't
This
do
is
this.
absolutely diabolical behaviour.
Not happy with being called out, Piers furiously stormed off, live, and then quit the entire show, like a toddler throwing a tantrum.
Following discussions with ITV, Piers Morgan has decided now is the time to leave Good Morning Britain.
Number 15. Matt Hancock. He's the bloke who gave a bunch of PPE contracts to his mates and, along with Boris Johnson, mishandled the pandemic so much the UK had one of the highest death rates in Europe.
I didn't break any laws. Guidance is different, but anyway, I don't want to go
Oh, so there's a rule and there's a law.
And he also made it to the final on 2022's series of I'm a Celebrity. It was the first series back in Australia, after the previous two went to Wales because of the aforementioned global pandemic. And Matt Hancock's shock arrival caused no shortage of controversy.
Even when PPE with carers and with old people's homes.
Yes.
He was still sitting as an MP at the time, though subsequently had the Tory whip removed, and his presence down under was brought up in Parliament. He did it all to sell his book, which completely bombed regardless.
What I'm really looking for is a bit of forgiveness. That's what I'm really looking for.
Number 14. Richard Bacon. There's been a handful of Blue Peter controversies over the years, but this is, by far, the most absurd.
One of the Sunday newspapers reported that Richard Bacon, a Blue Peter presenter, had taken an illegal drug.
Presenter Richard Bacon had to be let go from the show in the late 90s after allegations from the tabloids that he'd been snorting Class A drugs off the back of one of the Blue Peter tortoises.
I got fired for punctuality. Because if you take a lot of coke, you're always late for things. So.
In subsequent years, Bacon has denied the story, specifically the bit about the tortoise, rather than the bit about the drugs, as he's been open about that.
Fred and Frida, the tortoises on Blue Peter.
Yeah.
Big white lines.
Well, he gave them coke.
I didn't give any tortoises coke, right?
But the story was so massive and so out of control that the BBC had no choice but to sack him and make him turn in his Blue Peter badge in shame. Number 13. Wank Week. Classic Channel 4. Back in 2007, it was slated to dedicate an entire week of programming to the act of self-pleasure.
I'm going to go for a quick tug.
What, in here?
Nah, there must be a spare room around here somewhere.
It was set to cover masturbation from an array of angles, with addicts on one end of the spectrum and attempts to be more sex-positive about masturbation on the other.
I'm being paid to wank. It's my perfect job.
While this would probably air no problem now, this was the noughties, and lots of people were outraged at Channel 4 for trying to lift the lid on the nation's most private habits. They were furious, even though the shows were all going to air at 11 p.m, way past the watershed.
Right, I think it's about that time, Neil.
What, again?
Look, when you've got as much spunk as I have, you need to release the valve a couple of times a day.
The backlash got so severe that, ultimately, Wank Week was thrown in the bin like a used tissue. Number 12. Q-Gate. Following the Queen's passing in 2022, her coffin lay in state in London for days. The queue was miles long, with many queuing overnight to get in and pay their respects to Her Majesty.
The rules were that we would be quickly escorted around the edges to a platform at the back. In contrast, those paying respects walked along a carpeted area beside the coffin.
Everybody queued, except for Holly Willoughby and Philip Schofield, it seems. Photos of the duo apparently queue jumping went viral, with many calling for them to be sacked from this morning.
None of the broadcasters and journalists there took anyone's place in the queue, and no one filed past the Queen.
They had to make statements about how they'd actually been in a totally separate press queue and hadn't taken anybody's place, but the damage was done. There was huge public outrage, and even months later, Scof was still getting grilled over Q-Gate on his doorstep.
Please know that we would never jump a queue.
Number 11. Sex Box.
We asked couples to have sex in a box.
Would you like to sleep with someone in a giant box on a stage surrounded by a studio audience, on television, potentially for the first time? Well then, this is the show for you. Running for a few years in the 2010s, Sex Box was part of Channel 4's campaign for real sex, and featured couples, some with existing relationships, some not, taking to the giant sex box to let off some steam.
Why have you volunteered yourselves for the sex box?
I think we just want to show that we're a normal, healthy couple. We just happen to be men.
They then leave the box and have to talk to a group of sex experts about what they'd gotten up to and how it made them feel.
So how are you guys? How are you feeling? You look a bit blurry.
Yeah, I feel a bit... Yeah. The blood's rushed to this head now.
It was criticised by many for being gimmicky, weird and pointless, and only had 11 total episodes. Number 10. Orange Man. Meant to convey the bite and buzz you'll feel when you crack open a can of Orange Tango, this advert doesn't seem too problematic by modern standards. But it wasn't necessarily the ad itself that courted controversy, but the stories of children and teenagers getting tangoed, i.e. kids were slapping each other around the face.
Oh, yes, we could be in for a quintessential tango taste sensation here. Why?
Unsubstantiated stories even came out about kids actually ending up in A&E, and it wasn't the last time Tango's You Know When You've Been Tangoed campaign ended up making the headlines. Another ad, named Pipes, was made in 2004.
And he's gone, look at that!
The ASA was worried it would encourage people to put themselves in dangerous situations and banned it. Number 9. EastEnders Goes to Ireland. The year was 1997, and the brains at EastEnders decided it was time to do something different.
It was from Ireland, from this woman called Maggie. She says she's my sister, and she wants me to go to Ireland to meet her.
The writers introduced a storyline where Pauline Fowler and company find out they have a group of long-lost relatives overseas in Ireland. The episodes were filmed on location in Dublin, and, still a year before the Good Friday Agreement was signed, certainly didn't help the fraught political situation between Ireland and the UK. Offensive Irish stereotypes abounded in the 3 episodes, which saw the Fowlers and Beales mostly encountering rowdy, drunk Irish people.
Oh, don't go if you don't want to.
No, we weren't saying that.
What were you saying then?
When the Irish embassy got involved, the BBC was forced to issue an apology. Number 8. Bill Grundy interviews the Pistols.
They're as drunk as I am. They are clean by comparison. They're a group called the Sex Pistols.
One of the most infamous clips to ever grace the stage of British television, in 1976, the Sex Pistols were drafted in to replace Queen on The Today Show when Queen cancelled at short notice. It was clear from the beginning that the interviewer, Bill Grundy, was either drunk, didn't like the Pistols, or both.
What are we saying, sir?
Wonderful people.
Are they?
Oh, yes, they really turn us on.
He went out of his way to provoke them into swearing before the watershed, something that still isn't allowed decades later, and was largely successful. But despite the Pistols' profanity, it was still Grundy who came out of the interview with no career waiting for him, while the Pistols became one of the biggest bands of all time.
We'll meet afterwards, shall we?
You dirty sod. You dirty old man.
Number 7. Benefit Street.
James Turner Street was one of the best streets.
Unemployed.
No, one of the worst.
Rather than an isolated incident, the entire concept and execution of Channel 4's Benefit Street was a magnet for controversy from the beginning. It was widely described as poverty porn, touring deprived working-class areas and exploiting people reliant on Britain's welfare system.
I'll grow out of it at some point. I hope.
Channel 4 executives were even interviewed on the BBC about whether Benefit Street is helpful or harmful to benefits claimants, repeatedly saying that the show aimed to represent the poorest parts of society to raise awareness of inequality.
It's like I'm out here every day, but the stuff you see, you don't say nothing to no one.
But in the end, the show was axed after just 2 series, and in the years since, many news stories have appeared on the deaths of multiple cast members. Number 6. Hardwick House.
Remember, my door is always open. Metaphorically speaking, of course.
Since school is a universal experience in the UK, shows about school, whether comedies, dramas or documentaries, can be incredibly successful. But that wasn't true for the short-lived sitcom Hardwick House, which aired briefly in early 1987. 7 episodes were made, but the public hated the show so much that only the first 2 ever reached the small screen.
Imagine knocking off that.
Well, you can talk with your missus.
It featured wildly inappropriate storylines about the teaching staff leering at the girls and highly violent comedy skits. These things wouldn't be amiss in an edgy show in a late-night slot, but Hardwick House was on TV much too early to justify its obscenity.
Gillian, there's a pile of crap.
Number 5. Zara Holland loses her title. It takes a lot more than looks to win the Miss Great Britain beauty pageant. The winner also has to be able to represent Britain in global beauty pageants as well.
You know when you're in the moment, and it just happens? It was sort of like one of them.
That's the reason Zara Holland, who won the competition in 2015, had her title stripped after a particularly steamy stint on Love Island the following year. After getting up to no good with fellow islander Alex Bowen almost as soon as he entered the villa, Holland was deemed unfit to represent Britain on the world stage by the Miss GB organisers.
Well, they've taken my title off me.
But many people came to Holland's defence and, in turn, criticised the entire Miss Great Britain pageant for being old-fashioned.
I'm okay. I'm doing okay.
You're all right.
I'm all right now.
Number 4. The Red Triangle.
From time to time, in the late evening, Channel 4 transmits films made for the cinema, which some viewers may find a bit strong for television.
For just a few months in the 1980s, Channel 4, generally the most maverick broadcaster in the UK, experimented with a new form of warning for adult programming. This warning was a red triangle logo, and it was displayed on screen with selected films, which were aired very late at night and were often X-rated.
Special discretion required will come up again before the film continues.
This got Channel 4 a lot of attention, including from one of TV's most infamous critics, Mary Whitehouse. In the end, the Red Triangle films, as they came to be known, garnered huge viewing figures, and then a lot of disappointment when they turned out to be foreign art house films rather than the raunchy content people had been hoping for. Number 3. Hell's Angel.
What makes Teresa of Calcutta so divine?
Mother Teresa, a devout nun with a long history of humanitarianism, was one of the most celebrated figures of the 20th century. She was widely praised for her charity work and, after her death, was made a saint by the Catholic Church. But she wasn't without her critics, and one of the most prominent was the famous British intellectual and atheist Christopher Hitchens.
How does the reputation of Holy Mother Teresa look if, just for a moment, we switch off Malcolm Muggeridge's kindly light?
In 1994, Hitchens, along with journalist Tariq Ali, wrote the documentary Hell's Angel, which Hitchens presented, denouncing Mother Teresa as a fraud who denied vital medical attention to those in her care and tried to forcibly convert people to Catholicism.
For someone whose kingdom is not of this earth, Mother Teresa has an easy way with thrones, dominions and powers.
The ensuing fallout led to Hitchens being widely criticised in return. Number 2. Investigative reporting. If you're going to go undercover on one of the 1990s most popular TV shows, you probably shouldn't use your real name, or else the show's producers might realise that you're actually a journalist.
Well, Nicola, I have to say I've got more than a big surprise for you.
That's exactly what happened to Cosmopolitan reporter Nicola Gill when she appeared on Blind Date looking for the inside story, pretending to be a single secretary.
You don't work as a temporary secretary. I know for a fact that you're an undercover journalist and you've robbed somebody of coming on a proper blind date.
Astonishingly, rather than quietly ask Nicola to leave, host and national treasure Cilla Black outed Nicola as a journalist during filming.
She's a journalist, ladies and gentlemen, not a blind date at all.
She was met with resounding boos from the audience and confusion from her date. And not only was she not a secretary, but she was also engaged to be married.
Nicola Gill of Cosmopolitan magazine.
Before we begin, we publish new content every day, so be sure to subscribe to our channel and ring the bell to get notified about our latest videos.
Number 1. Charles Ingram. A scandal like no other racked the world of British game shows in 2001 when Major Charles Ingram won the top prize on Who Wants to Be a Millionaire.
You just won £1 million!
But Ingram never saw any of that money, because ITV realised that his wife, who was in the audience and had previously been a contestant, was coughing when the correct answer was said aloud.
It's up to you. I can't help you, Charles. It's your lifeline gone, but...
Delivery of the jackpot was frozen, and ITV handed its evidence over to the police to investigate.
I think it was Holbein.
2 years later, the trial was over, and Chris, his wife Diana, and fellow audience member Tequin Wittick were found guilty of fraud.
Do you agree with our picks? Check out these other great clips from WatchMojoUK and subscribe for more great content.